Hey guys, Dan here. I recently wrapped up the third round of the Good Guy Collab, which is a collaborative build process that I open up periodically to my patrons. And after working on this kit here, which is the HG Hyaku Shiki Revive for a couple of days, I finished it. And it looks pretty good and I'm pretty happy with it. And before I send it back to its owner, I wanted to just kind of take a look at the kit together and kind of offer some feedback to the builder, as well as anyone else who's watching, for things to watch out for while they're building. This video is not intended to be mean-spirited or mocking anything like that. It's merely here for constructive criticism, so hopefully you find this video to be of some value. So we're going to start with the mobile suit, which as a kit, it's actually a very nice kit. I was quite pleased with just the overall quality of it. It's definitely a leap forward over some earlier HGs that I've built. Now we're going to start with pretty basic stuff and kind of move into some more general and specific comments for this kit. So the first thing I want to point out are there are still a few minor nub marks, and it looks like to me that this, for example, wasn't sanded, but it seems like it was also the only one on the shoulders that wasn't sanded. And I've run into this situation too, personally, when I've been building, and typically it happens as a result of me snipping out, all of the shoulder parts. I'll just lose track of a nub and I'll forget to take care of it, and usually it's not until I start priming the kit that I notice it. So one thing that I would recommend is basically as you're going through the parts, snip out a part, clean it up, sand it, and then move on to the next one. It's just a easy way to stay organized inside of your head. The next thing is this flashing that goes down the piping on the backpack, so you can see it when the light hits it. Just that thin little plastic ridge right down the center of the pipe. Now, this occurs actually when you have two halves of the injection mold that close on this pipe. That seam is right where they meet, and it's usually due to a small gap during the process, and you basically wind up with this little ridge. Now what you should do to clean this up is basically use just like really fine grade, maybe like 1000, 1200 grit sandpaper, and just buff this off. It doesn't take a whole lot to remove it, but it's rather visible on a rounded over part like this, so that's something to keep in mind. On the subject of round parts, and this is probably going to require me to take the armor off of the leg here, which let me just do really quickly. Okay. Come on. There we go. So this kit, the builder did a pretty good job of fusing the seam lines for the legs, because unfortunately it does go right down the center of the leg. This kit normally has kind of a cylinder here at the front of the leg, and you can probably notice that this cylinder has been flattened. Now, when you're dealing with round parts like this, you need to follow a process where, for example, I'm going to use my X-Acto knife handle and this file here. When you're sanding here, you can't just go back and forth in one direction, because you're going to wind up flattening the part. You need to follow a curve around the part. So always keep it moving and never just crank on it on one plane, because you will flatten it out. So that's something to keep in mind. He actually went pretty hard on here, because you can see that the panel line down here is almost completely gone. Another good tip for just kind of starting the cleanup process on a round part like this is, instead of going right for your sandpaper, take your X-Acto knife and just run it over the ridge of glue that will form when you're doing a seam line fusion. That will take away most of the material, and then you can just kind of buff it out with a high grit sandpaper. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Another comment, you can kind of see it here where there's that gap. You can see it to a lesser extent. If I can get it to focus right up here, you can kind of see there's like a dark line in the center here, and it's more prominent on the back there. If you have these thin little gaps here after fusing a seam line, this is generally indicative that you didn't use enough glue during the seam line fusion process. I recently created a tutorial which should be on YouTube by now, and if it is, I'll put a link in the description, showing that when I do a seam line fusion, I wind up putting in way more glue than seems necessary. And when you pinch the two parts together, you'll actually have a lot of material that kind of oozes out from that gap. And that's a good sign, because it means that you have enough material there to fill any gaps. In the case where, for example, you do that, and for some reason there are still little pits along, this seam, kind of like there's a little pit that's just down here. You can kind of make it out. This can actually be filled really easily. You don't even need to use putty. I actually will use super glue, or like a high fill primer like 500 grit, and just, hand paint it in there, let it dry, sand it. If it's still there, another layer, etc., 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 until you build up enough to cover it. Let's see. I don't really think that there was much else. He did a really good job building this kit. It was nice and clean. He puttied a fair bit of the weapons because, unfortunately, kind of like some of the other parts, these are just two halves that are fused together. You can see there are still some of the same seamline issues that we discussed earlier on the weapons, and there's a bit of a chunk out down here. So just when you're cutting with your nippers, don't cut into the part. Always cut parallel to. And then when you're removing nubs, same process. Never cut like this. Always cut parallel to, and then just sand. That'll definitely prevent you from taking any chunks out like that. But otherwise, the gun was really well done. The bazooka, kind of the same thing. I would use, I don't know if this is the result of using too low of a grit of sandpaper, something that's too aggressive and it's just taking too much material off, but you can see we've kind of lost a little bit of the panel lining up here, and you can even kind of notice, I think there's supposed to be a ridge up here, and it kind of gradually fades as we move down the barrel. But yeah, I mean, overall, this isn't too bad. This is better than my first couple of attempts with doing seamline fusion, so definitely props to the builder. But that's kind of it. I didn't really have any other comments on this build. The seam lines were all done in such a way that it was still very easy to paint. Sometimes people will go overboard fusing seam lines and then have to mask every little bit of the kit to get everything the correct color. But the way he did his seamline fusions on this build, it's actually just perfect, just absolutely perfect. So this is, again, the high-grade Hyaku Shiki Revive, and I'm Dan, and if you'd like to get in these collabs, sign up to be a patron. I do these periodically. I've been doing them about every 3 months, and my goal is to do about 4 a year. So this is the third one that I've done, but only the second one this year, so if you do sign up as a patron, you still will have basically 2 chances to submit kits for the collab. And I've had a lot of fun with it. I love turning these builds around really quickly. And believe it or not, this entire kit was basically painted in 2 nights, give or take. So, alright guys, thank you very much. I hope this little critique here has been useful, not just to the builder of this kit, but to people in general. And I think I'm going to make this a part of the collab process going forward, just so people can take advantage of kind of my interpretation of what's going on here. So thank you very much, guys, and take care of yourselves. Dan out. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you haven't already, like, comment, and subscribe.